Chapter 232. The interior of the castle was much more spacious than it looked from the outside. Even with Kitten's map, Huaisher almost got lost. It was like an illegal building, tangled and complicated, and heavily locked. Everywhere was covered in dust, and whether it was the picture frames on the walls or the sculptures, they had all been weathered and peeled off, their original appearance impossible to see. There seemed to be some kind of shadow wandering in the darkness, but if one looked closely, they wouldn't be able to find any traces. The remnants of origin substance that had been left behind until now had soaked into the darkness, forming the outlines and reflections of the past. Even though time was limited, Huaisher still explored cautiously, afraid that he would go the wrong way. According to Kitten, this castle could be said to be the hub of the entire theme park, and there were more than a few princes hidden inside. If he went the wrong way, he might provoke a monster even more terrifying than the princes. What was even more frightening was that after leaving the hall and entering the depths of the castle, the system panel disappeared. This place was already outside the range of the Shinua framework. In other words, the effects of the false life had already disappeared. If he died here, he wouldn't be able to leisurely revive outside the arena. Instead, he would be buried here forever, accompanying the withered bones of the past. If things went wrong, he might not even be able to die. No wonder those 10 or so ascendants weren't willing to live inside, preferring to sleep in the hall. If they weren't careful, they would end up with a fate of never being reincarnated. No one would be willing to. The deeper they went, the more unsightly Amber and Ansali's expressions became. This place was truly the depths of hell, so thick that it made it difficult for people to breathe. It was dense in the air, constantly eroding their consciousness. If they didn't have a structure like a soul to preserve their consciousness, they would probably be frozen in an instant, forever becoming a corrosive object in this hell. Relying on the double protection of their stigmata and soul, they were as careful as if they were wearing spacesuits in space. On the other hand, Huaisher's footsteps were light, his expression calm, and he would occasionally take a deep breath as if he were on a spring outing. Amber and Ansali exchanged glances with each other. This guy might have already been corroded. Why don't I just give him a quick death? No. No matter what, he's still a teammate. You shouldn't stab your teammate in the back if you can, right? Teammate? I don't have a teammate who steals my kills. But if you kill him, won't you have to deal with the prince? My Rygian family has been a minister for generations. Why can't I be called a prince? Although his heart was itching, in the end, Hoopa didn't do anything that would make the people happy. He just followed behind Huaisher with his 2 long swords, until Huaisher suddenly stopped in his tracks and raised his hand to signal the people behind him to be alert. He was just a few more steps away from the door to the lounge, but suddenly an inexplicable premonition of death emerged in his heart, piercing his forehead with a chill. There's something wrong with the door in front. He turned his head, took out a quill from the elephant branch, and wrote a line of words for them to read. Which of you has a way of looking at the door? Amber innocently removed his hand from the hilt of his sword and looked at Ansali. Ansali nodded and rubbed the oil lamp again. A streak of colorful black light peeked out from the opening of the lamp, but it shrunk back awkwardly and changed to another one. A wisp of gray fog silently flowed out from the opening of the lamp. Even when Huaisher got closer and squinted his eyes to look carefully, he couldn't see it clearly. Under Ansali's control, the wisp of gray fog became fainter and fainter, until it completely disappeared into the air. Only something between existence and non-existence slowly flew in the direction of the door. Along with the cold wind, it slowly seeped behind the door. Immediately after, Ansali's hand trembled, and his face turned pale. He almost couldn't stand still. Huaisher and Hoopa were stunned. They widened their eyes and waited for him to say what he saw, however, and Solly grabbed their hands and pressed them on his oil lamp. In an instant, the scene behind the door appeared in front of Huaisher's eyes. It was like a spider's nest. Countless dried black heads crisscrossed from the narrow corridor, like kelp floating in water. They constantly wriggled slightly, turning into countless poisonous snakes that chose to bite people. They completely occupied the entire corridor, and behind the countless dried hairs, there was a skinny figure sitting upright at the door of the lounge, like an air-dried corpse without any moisture. He didn't look as handsome as he did during the day, but instead revealed the ferocious appearance of a skeleton. Draped in tattered clothes, the dried and broken prince guarded the door of the lounge. His eyes were lowered, and two shriveled eyeballs in his dark eye sockets were unfocused. Only the aura of the abyss that rose from his body tyrannically ravaged the surrounding space, causing the air to distort and become like a lens. Huaisher let go of his hand and looked behind the door in astonishment. Damn, didn't they say they were all asleep? Why was there still someone keeping watch at night? What the hell should he do? Hoopa took out a map and gestured to Huaisher. Are there any other passageways? Ventilation ducts and sewers are also fine. Huaisher shook his head. Chapter 233. 5, 4, 3. 3 seconds passed in the blink of an eye. The lamp spirit's face was already covered with cracks. As he suddenly stretched out his hand, the clothes of darkness returned and covered his body. Then, the light and darkness melted and returned to chaos. A broken shadow with layers of cracks suddenly shrank into the oil lamp, and Solly staggered back and sat on the ground. He was sweating profusely, and his face was pale. As if the eternal darkness was torn apart, the prince opened his eyes again and angrily opened his mouth, as if he was about to roar. But then he saw the girl kneeling at the end of the corridor. He lowered his eyes. His fingers rested on the hilt of the sword at his waist, as if he was holding a willow, quiet and gentle. Facing his furious expression, Hoopa raised his face. In his dark eyes, the camouflage hidden in the darkness was torn apart, revealing a fierce outline. The long sleeve of the arm, holding the hilt, suddenly shook. It was as if a breeze had blown past. At that moment, a clear voice resounded in the air. It was as if a bird on a willow branch rose with the wind and flapped its wings in the sky, blowing away the dark clouds and revealing the brilliant stars in the sky, and the wonderful outline of the moon, drawing the sword, slashing, blood-shaking, sheathing. It was a terrifying swordsmanship that was completed in an instant, beyond the limit of what the naked eye could see. Dozens of meters away, the cold light of the sword sprinkled down. So, on the prince's chest, the ancient clothes were torn apart, revealing the slash mark that suddenly appeared on his shriveled chest. From the slash mark, a ray of cold moonlight shone out silently. Unique sword, Yayoi Moon. The moonlight was like a nail penetrating the body and bones, wedging the furious soul in the broken body, forcibly suppressing and sealing it. Hoopa had been exhausted on the ground. Sweat dripped from his cheeks and fell on his trembling fingers. Time continued to pass. The moonlight collapsed. In the furious wind gushing out from the wound, the long-haired prince struggled violently, pulled out the broken moonlight, and crushed it between his 5 fingers. He opened his mouth, and behind his sharp teeth, a vicious breath was brewing in his dark mouth. 0. Huaisher took a step forward. While he was in a trance, Li Jian Hoopa froze for a moment and felt a wave of heat assaulting his face. It was as if an oven had passed by. But that was just an illusion. It was a feeling and threat that only existed in one's consciousness. It was a subtle feeling that could not be experienced physically. Something had awakened. From Huaisher's body, dark green flames rose from the youth's body, engulfing him within. In the gap between his chest, the light of purgatory lava silently surged, spiraling after a long period of brewing. The origin substance, which was filled with despair, pain, and madness, transformed into a tsunami and exploded forth. Huaishur took another step forward. Immediately after the effect of the unique sword ended, he leaned forward and bent down. Just like the etiquette taught by Kitten, he placed his hand on his chest and saluted. Under the witness of paradise, I challenge you to a duel. Suddenly, the space in the corridor stagnated. An illusory light descended out of thin air and froze everything. Then it stripped away all the interference of irrelevant people. Whether it was Li Jianhupa or Ansali's power, they were all blocked outside. Then Huaishur's shotgun magazine and a series of relics from the border, and even the power that did not belong to him, were all stripped away. And on the prince's body, the armor under his clothes, the bracelet on his wrist, the boots on his feet, and even half of his iron skull suddenly disappeared without a trace. Only each of them was left, and the chain that bound the prince's body was constantly bursting with sparks. It was already a part of Huaishur's soul. The youth grinned. He raised his wrist and clenched the iron axe in the void. At that moment, the duel began. Oh no! Ansali's expression suddenly changed. He raised the oil lamp and used all his strength to release the Dark Kingdom. Through the Paradise's shield, it enveloped the entire corridor. Then, the roar of iron tore through the barrier and burst out from the Dark Kingdom. Iron was burning. It was as if the scorching sun had suddenly jumped out from the horizon of the Dark Kingdom, spreading its tyrannical brilliance in all directions. Huaishur stepped forward amidst the loud sound of breaking air. You step. After 3 steps, a hurricane swept up the broken floor tiles and flew up. The youth had already broken through the restraints of the gale. The burning mountain ghost was close at hand. He raised the invisible axe in his hand towards the prince in front of him. Slash! Ansali could not describe what he saw at that moment. It was as if a phantom had appeared from the youth's body and rose up. Huaishur broke free of all restraints. As he took a step forward, the spear with the brilliance of 400 years appeared in his hand, followed by the blade of sacrifice that swallowed blood. He clearly held it in his hand and slashed forward, sweeping across, and piercing through. Was that a change in origin substance or a terrifying speed that was completed purely by the body? Or was it that even time overlapped at this moment? The burning mountain ghost was roaring from a moment that was so long that it was almost frozen. A moment passed in the blink of an eye. The youth and the prince brushed past each other. He staggered forward with the remaining power and knelt on the ground in a sorry state. The physical strength that he had used up was completely recovered. Good stuff. Do you want another bite? Huaishur smacked his lips. I didn't taste it before. You're thinking too much. Hoopa glanced at him and put the small gourd into her arms. Her waist was still slim, and he couldn't see how she hid it. He was really curious about how many random things she had in her wide robe. Huaishur looked at her a few more times and found that Hoopo's eyes were looking at him with danger. So he quickly looked away. Of course, he knew why his teammate gave him such good stuff. After all, Huaishur was the only one who could do the rest. It was related to the success or failure of the mission, so no one wanted to fail. They only hoped that Huaishur wouldn't eat and drink for free without doing anything. Okay, leave the rest to me. Huaishur waved his hand, indicating that they didn't need to worry. He got up from the ground, patted the dust off his body, and checked the pile of random things that Kitten gave him one last time. After making sure that he didn't miss anything, he walked to the door of the lounge. He carefully pushed it open. In the silence, the door opened silently, revealing the deep abyss behind it. The materialized darkness silently rose and shrunk, as if it was breathing cold and quiet. Only a gust of chilly wind blew over, causing one's hair to stand on end. No wonder they all looked so strange. It would be strange if they didn't fall asleep sleeping in a place like this every day. It was almost winter, but they didn't even install an air conditioner. TSK. Huaishir pursed his lips, stepped into it, and was swallowed by the darkness. It was like being swallowed into the stomach of a giant beast, distinguishing the composition of the newcomer and identifying whether or not it was an intruder. When the authority left by Kitten and Huaishir's own characteristics were verified, he silently appeared in an unfamiliar environment. In a dilapidated theater, Huaishir stood on the stage and looked around. It was exactly the same as Kitten's place. It was a ruin that had been in disrepair for a long time. Only on the high platform around the stage, the 7 huge seats still retained the luxury of the past. Except for the empty seat on the right that belonged to the long-haired prince, the other 6 seats had figures leaning on them, sleeping and defenseless. Only with the appearance of Huaishir under one of the chairs, a pair of blood-red eyes crawling in the dust slowly raised. A half-rotten thing that looked like a snake wrapped around the leg of the chair, snuggling up to the sleeping prince with black hair and black eyes, staring at him vigilantly. Shocked, Huaishir froze for a moment, and a chill ran down his spine. Why was there a dog inside? Kitten didn't say. Chapter 234. After being stunned for a short while, the snake looked at Huaishir with a dangerous gaze. But soon, it seemed to understand something. It looked back at its master, lowered its eyes tiredly, gently snuggled up to the prince who had accompanied it for a long time, and closed its eyes. Huaishir carefully took a step forward, but the snake did not respond. Even when he was close to it, it only raised its eyes to look at him coldly, and then looked away. It seemed to be tired. It fell into a deep sleep. Huaishir carefully rummaged through the things that Kitten gave him. Soon, he found a small box and opened it. Inside, there was a piece of gold foil cut into the shape of a flower. It was painted with a conspicuous peach blossom pattern and had a faint fragrance. Following Kitten's instructions, Huaishir held his breath, picked up the piece of gold foil, and gently placed it on the black-haired prince's forehead. As if time had reversed, quietly, the ferocious prince became handsome and slender. The corners of his mouth curved into a smile, as if he was dreaming of a beautiful dream. It dissipated into dust. The snake also disappeared without a trace. In the ashes, only a small dagger was left, full of ancient feeling. The second prince settled, but Huaishir's heart was not happy and fortunate. Instead, it was a little heavy. In the past, who knew how many years these princes should have been dazzling and handsome, right? With pure gentleness and kindness, they walked in the legends, but now they had declined to this extent. They couldn't even ask for relief. He continued to move forward and took out a small bottle from his pocket. The bottle was filled with an emerald green liquid, which exuded a sweet fragrance like apple juice. He quietly poured it on the lips of the next prince. As if moistened by the fragrance of the juice, the withered and decayed face became beautiful, and the red lips were bright. Then it turned into dust. The next one, when he passed by the long-haired prince, Huaishir thought for a moment, took out a small pair of scissors from his pocket, and put it together with the strand of golden hair in his position. Let these stay here as their memento. Then there was a warm heart-shaped ruby, like a heart full of love, with a certain person's name written on it. It was placed in the hands of the red-haired prince who used to wield fire. He collapsed into dust, and in the dust there was an ice crystal-like gem and a red heart. Huaishir continued to move forward without stopping. He carefully followed Kitten's instructions and finished off the last few princes. When the last prince dissipated into dust, leaving behind a small sharp knife and a crystal that was as small as a bubble, Huaishir finally breathed a sigh of relief. He felt sweat dripping from his forehead. Mission complete. He sat down on the shabby stage, unable to get up for a long time. Only now did his hands begin to tremble, and a belated fear rose in his heart. Just now, he had almost died without leaving a corpse behind in hell. If any of the princes were to be awakened, the consequences would be unimaginable. After a long, long time, he finally let out a sigh of relief. He got up from the stage and walked towards the entrance of the theater. Then he heard a voice behind him. "Are you leaving just like that?" Weisher froze on the spot. He slowly turned his head. Then she saw a young man standing on the stage for a long time. He was handsome and beautiful, with bright golden hair and a trace of a smile that made people uneasy. He wore a crown on his head that showed the inheritance of royal power and a sword at his waist. Another prince. Weisher stared at him in astonishment. After a long time, he suddenly felt a little powerless. Where did the 4 heavenly kings come from? 8 out of 7 princes. Isn't this a little too against the rules? What? Is this unexpected? The unfamiliar prince asked with a smile. There was no anger or gloom in his expression, but instead it was bright and gentle. A little. Weisher sighed. "May I ask which prince you are?" "I'm none of them." The prince slowly shook his head. "At best, I'm just the remnant of their last obsession. Even if you leave me alone, I may not be able to exist until tomorrow morning." Weisher looked at him in confusion and frowned. "You don't seem angry? Why should I be angry?" The prince asked rhetorically. "Didn't they get rid of it in the end? That's enough. Instead of continuing to live on, it's better to meet the end with dignity. No matter how cruel and crazy they have become now, they used to be kind and gentle people. Even if they don't deserve sympathy, at least they have the backbone of a prince, right?" Weisher was speechless. "Thank you very much for helping us get rid of the ugly appearance we have now. Please allow me to express my sincere gratitude to you." With that, the prince put his hand on his chest and bowed. Weisher didn't know how to answer. Should he say that you're welcome? Or should he say that he's sorry for your loss? It didn't seem right. Then you should thank me. I'll take my leave first." Weisher took 2 steps back and quietly walked to the door. He reached out to push the door, but found that he couldn't. "So, after thanking me, you still want to take revenge, right?" He sighed helplessly. "Revenge? It's not revenge. What revenge can there be?" The prince said, "The reason why I'm here is just to fulfill their last wish. Every injustice has its perpetrator, and every debt has its debtor. I'm just an employee. Why don't you go and get rid of the kitten? That guy is the culprit." Weisher said carelessly. He secretly raised his guard and focused on dealing with the huge pressure from the prince. "You may have misunderstood." The prince raised the corner of his mouth and smiled brightly. With the rotation of gears, countless hubs were combined, and the rise and fall of elevators, countless props rose and disappeared from the slowly rotating stage. With the change of pure colors, the presence and absence of props, and the change of the background on the fabric curtain, the climate of the 4 seasons of the world was interwoven, evolving into the scenery of thousands of mountains and rivers. The world had been condensed on this small stage, and the performance of the princes had already begun. "Be careful!" The prince shouted. The white horse neighed and rallied. The iron hooves trampled on the gray carpet, and with the rise of the elevators, it jumped between countless props and fake stones, as if galloping on a towering mountain range, stepping on the protrusions on the cliff, and swooping down toward Weisher. No, at this moment, what appeared in front of him should be a real mountain, even if it was just a background and an abstract prop. At this moment, the effect formed was no different from a real mountain. Weisher was already halfway up the mountain. When he raised his head, He could feel the heavy pressure exerted by the towering mountain range, as well as the prince who was diving down from the top of the mountain. His momentum was like a rolling stone as he pressed forward, and his agility and swiftness were as if he was walking on flat ground between the mountains. Sweeping down from the top of the mountain, there was a whistling wind. The sky was gray, lightning flashed, and thunder rumbled. The huge pressure of the whole world covered him, making it difficult for him to move. In just a moment of shock, the white horse was already close to him, like a light. On the horse's back, the prince's sharp sword slashed down. Huai Shi subconsciously dodged and blocked, but he could not resist the huge force and was sent flying. In the air, he looked around, only to see the white horse jump up, as if it was stepping on the air, and rushed toward him. Wasn't it too much to bring a vehicle to crash into him? Huai Shi swung his hand, and the iron chain flew out, pulling him to the ground. Huai Shi turned in the air, dodged the trampling hooves of the white horse, and landed awkwardly. But as soon as he landed, he saw the color of the carpet turned dark blue. A deep blue color appeared on the big screen behind him. In the projection of the sky, countless schools of fish could be vaguely seen. The floor flipped, and suddenly a picture of a coral reef flipped out. On the guide rails on the ceiling, boards painted with the pattern of waves hung down, moving up and down with the movement of the guide rails. This was the ocean. In the blink of an eye, gravity changed, and Huai Shi was suffocated. The white horse that fell from the sky broke through the air and into the sea, swaying its body nimbly, swimming back and forth in the sea, and rushed toward Huai Shi with the white horse on its back. "Where did you come from, Lu?" Chapter 236. In an instant, Huai Shi's movements changed from sluggish to nimble. It was as if he had transformed into a fish and merged into the sea. He swam in the air as if he was flying. He dodged the white horse's attack at the last moment and smiled at the prince. Then, with the help of the turbulent undercurrent in the sea, the axe fell without any delay, swift as the wind. In the special seats, the representative of the Theravada Tantra stopped in shock. "That is, well, what's wrong?" The representative next to him asked. "Did you see anything?" "No, nothing. I was mistaken." The representative shook his head slowly, and the doubts in his heart gradually dissipated. Although it looked like the Theravada Tantra's dual blade technique, the movements were similar, and the core was completely different. It was most likely a coincidence, right? But was there really such a coincidence? Huai Shi was like a fish in water. This set of dual blade technique, which had been completely integrated into the performance method, was displayed in Huai Shi's hands again. As the axe fell, a turbulent undercurrent was set off in the air. Then, the dagger pierced out, bypassed the blade, and stabbed at the prince's neck. The white horse suddenly turned in the sea and kicked with its iron hooves, but the current pushed Huai Shi to dodge calmly. The dagger slashed again, but was blocked by the sword. Impeccable swordsmanship was displayed in the deep sea. Even with the heavy pressure and resistance of the sea, the prince was still graceful and did not look embarrassed at all. The white horse charged, and the blade swept horizontally. This time, they were evenly matched. Amazing! In the midst of suffocation, Huai Shi's lips opened and closed, and he was not stingy with his praise and appreciation. The prince smiled, as if they were talking about the same thing. A sudden burst of power on the blade, pushing Huai Shi away. Huai Shi chased after him and stabbed with his spear, but the sea disappeared in an instant. The two of them landed on the ground, and the lift suddenly bulged. The stage turned into an ominous grayish-black color. When the light gray light shone on top of their heads and turned into dark clouds, his nose smelled a hallucinatory, pungent smell of sulfur. An uneasy premonition suddenly emerged. Just as he was closing in, the ground in front of him suddenly split open, and the youth's pursuit came to an abrupt end. A roll of red cloth flew out from it, and soared into the sky. It was like lava spewing out from a volcano. Even if it was a red cloth, if it was covered by it, it would probably be burned in an instant, right? Unable to move forward, Huaisher dodged backwards, but in the air. He threw the heavy axe towards the torrent in front of him. A shrill whistle broke through the air. The blade of the axe spiraled into the lava and tore through the red cloth. It was burned red, and with a raging fire, it spiraled towards the prince's face. The prince dodged sideways, allowing the axe to fly past his ear. Then, a chain flew over and tied itself to the handle of the axe. Huaisher suddenly tugged at it. The blade of the axe came back. Amidst the loud clanging of metal, a cut appeared on the prince's cheek. He no longer looked elegant, but his expression became more dignified and dignified. The white horse neighed angrily, bypassing the flying lava and galloping towards Huaisher. Blade pierce. Bang! The spear and the blade collided in the air. Huaisher retreated, but his movements suddenly stagnated. His sleeve was bitten by the white horse. Could it be like this? The blade of the sword was already chopping towards his arm. At the last moment, Huaisher summoned the sacrificial knife and held it upside down to block, but the blade of the sword wandered over the blade. In the end, it left a bone-deep wound on Huaisher's elbow. The white horse and Huaisher crossed each other and landed on the ground. The volcano had disappeared without a trace. In the dramatic change of scenery, the two were already standing at the top of the cathedral. Their feet stepped on the towering flying buttresses, and behind them was the tower that pointed to the sky like a sharp blade. The white horse nimbly turned around at the top of the cathedral. The prince on the horse stared at the youth in the distance and grinned. "You're really powerful. Huaisher." "Same to you." Huaisher twisted his neck and applied a silver blood potion to the wound on his elbow. He looked up and asked, "You seem to be having a hard time holding back. Your Highness, do you have any other moves?" "That's right." The prince nodded. "So, you're going easy on me?" Huaisher couldn't help but laugh. "I thought going all out was respecting my opponent. It's really a joy to have an opponent like you, Huaisher." The prince on the white horse smiled and seemed regretful. "Although it's a bit too much to say this, I just don't want this battle to end too quickly. If it's only to this extent, the battle will end soon, Your Highness." The flames of Mountain Ghost rose from the youth's body. The strength of Yu's steps erupted, and the footprints were deeply imprinted on the stone carvings of the cathedral. The youth moved forward and grinned. He said word by word, "I'm very powerful." "Is that so?" Staring at the youth's eyes, the prince was silent for a moment. Suddenly he laughed. "So be it. Huaisher, as you wish. I'll go all out. So don't lose too quickly." At that moment, the prince on the white horse raised the sword in his hand again. The upright blade reflected his handsome face, as dignified as if he was praying. He called out to the distance, "Lady, please sing for me." Then the soft sound of a harp sounded like a dream. Just behind the curtain on the left side of the stage, the figure of a young girl appeared. She strummed the harp in her hand and hummed softly. Chapter 237. At this moment, on the stage, the prince, who was waiting silently, quietly stared at the boy not far away. Suddenly, he showed a happy smile. "Very good. Huaisher." He clenched the reins and sword and nodded approvingly. "You are indeed a worthy opponent. I have to admit that the great popularity gathered on you is really the crown of glory. It is really enviable." "So?" Huaisher smiled and asked, "Do you want to admit defeat? If you do, you will lose half the battle." The prince was stunned for a moment. Then he laughed and slowly raised his sword. "I will do my best to defeat you and end tonight's duel." Why, sure, no matter which one of us wins, we can inherit this stage. Then bring it on. Huaishur grinned and hooked his finger at the prince on the white horse. His fighting spirit was burning. Then suddenly, it was a little dull, as if he remembered something. He looked back in shock and looked at the figure behind the curtain. Wait a minute. I remember you can't sing, right? Not only can he not sing, he is simply tone deaf. He was getting more and more worried. The girl behind the curtain, who was about to open her mouth, was stunned. Huaishur coughed and suggested in a low voice, "Why don't we change to someone else? You can just draw a sticker pack for me to cheer me on." In a short silence, that gaze became dangerous. Then a whistling hurricane burst out from the ear. The prince's laughter came. "Don't be distracted." Boom! The sword slashed down. Pure light burned and shot out from the blade of the sword. It was as if it could split the heavens and earth as it slashed in Huaishur's direction. Huaishur dodged pathetically in the midst of the hurricane. She was thrown into the air, but there was no sound behind the curtain. When the lead singer did not speak, the whole concert group was silent. I was wrong. Under the dazed eyes of the audience, Huaishur fell to the ground awkwardly. He had no time to fight back. He put his palms together and begged the girl behind the curtain for mercy. "I'm really sorry. I'm not a good person. My character is bad. Please don't lower yourself to my level, okay? Big brother, where did you find your ex-girlfriend to get back together from?" Countless audience members booed angrily. "I was just fired up and didn't even feel touched for a while. And you F***king did this to me. Can't you just fight properly?" For a moment, a lot of angry trash and bottles were thrown onto the stage. Boos could be heard everywhere. Both inside and outside the stadium, all the passionate supporters wanted to throw a negative comment at Huaishur's face, or simply cheer loudly for the prince who was chasing after Huaishur. "That's right, chop his face. I've disliked him for a long time. Come on, horse." Yes, kick between his legs. Even in the choir seats, the sailors who were playing trombones and other musical instruments were cheering loudly, hoping that this ignorant bastard would suffer more misfortune. Until the crisp sound of fingers snapping burst out from behind the curtain. Fine sounds spread out from his slender fingertips, like iron suppressing all other noises. As the heavy book flipped open in midair, a hoarse humming sound rang out, like smoke. Wemdergras Wurftlungen, Ines Freundesfreundsinn. The singing was not the sound of nature. Even though the voice was pleasant, it was not covered by all the noise on the noisy stage. Instead, it gradually spread. Like a soft question, it echoed in everyone's ears. Who can be a loyal friend and offer noble friendship? Who can get happy love? Come and get together with everyone. The spiraling voice spread out inextricably. As the girl behind the curtain raised her finger, an invisible force flowed out, covering the entire performance table. The first domino was pushed down, and a miraculous chain began. Immediately after, there was the high-pitched sound of trombones bursting out, and the melody of the violin turned into a river, flowing quietly, but with the convergence of countless small rivers, it evolved into a shocking wave. The sound of the iron drum burst out like the earthquake of the earth. From the intertwined melody, the voices of the old and the immature sounded, blending into the low chorus. Only by sincerely loving each other can you find a confidant. If you don't have this kind of heart, you can only let him cry. The singing was in response to the question from Huaishur. As the singing rose, countless rays of light emerged from the void, and the constantly fluctuating stage came to an abrupt stop. Countless flips rose and fell. The sky changed, and the climate of the four seasons changed violently, as if it was being fiddled with by an invisible hand. In the end, countless pillars emerged from the stage out of thin air, propping up the dome of the huge hall, shrouding the place in a solemn and majestic hall. The converging light reflected on the battered Huaishe as if it was screening something, judging whether he was qualified to accept this friendship. In an instant, it turned into rain, falling from the sky and covering his body, healing all the wounds and removing all the fatigue. Huaishe revived with full health. As if very satisfied with the result of the judgment, the girl behind the curtain played with 3 exquisite dice in her hand, and the corners of her mouth hooked up in a happy smile. Then listen, my friend. At that moment, the audience marveled at the magnificent change on the stage, but in the special seats, everyone could not help but straighten their bodies, widen their eyes, and stare at all this. This is soon after a symphonic roar burst forth from the girl's command. Like an ocean of light that devoured everything, the melody turned into a mighty torrent that swept across, intimidating every single soul and unifying every single stray thought. After eliminating all disputes and worries, all disagreements were completely eliminated, many as one. That was a soul-stirring chorus that sounded like the crashing of a stormy sea. In the grand melody of the organ, all the members at the performance table opened their mouths and sang in unison, Freude, Schöner Götterfunken Tochter, Aus Elysium. Indescribable joy burst forth from this melody, rising above the heavens and earth, turning into the only melody in this world. This was the one and only ode to joy. The Creator. In the special seats, the representative of the Astronomical Association finally woke up from his shock and blurted out in disbelief, "That's a creator." A creator had graced this hell with his presence. Standing at the peak of countless scholars and mortals, he was able to revise the laws of reality and set new rules out of thin air. With a wave of his hand, he could turn hell into a paradise. But now, the Creator, who was as noble as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns in the world, had suddenly appeared here, controlling the melody of miracles and singing for an unknown young boy. Who was it? This should be the source code of the Roman genealogy. But when did such a mysterious existence appear in the Roman genealogy? Could it be that, in addition to the 4 creators living in seclusion in the church, there were new creators born in these years? But who was it? Such a young woman shouldn't be unknown to the public. Countless astonished gazes were exchanged. Some were astonished, some were shocked, and some were at a loss. In the end, they all turned into numbness, feeling that they had fallen into a pile of lemons. Why? Such a thick golden thigh appeared just like that. This bastard's background was actually so deep. Wait, in other words, that guy was really not a freak from the looming hall? The expression of the 7 Stars Group's representative changed drastically as he stared at the representative of the Astronomical Association. Department Head Lu looked over blankly, but with a glance, the 7 Stars representative felt like he had fallen into an ice cave. Yes, an ascender with the support of the Roman genealogy appeared in the Asian rookie competition. There must be some shady deal behind this. Although he had long suspected the identity of that little brat, if he were to expose him. The bastard from the looming hall is too much. The 7 Stars representative instantly realized. He slapped his knee and shouted angrily. He knows that he can't win the competition with his weak background, so he actually wants to collude with other genealogies and borrow external forces. It's simply shameless. A shattering sound came from behind. At the door, the eunuch who had just pushed the door open looked at him in shock. The oxygen tank that was originally hanging in his hand fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. You pointing at him with a trembling finger, the eunuch's face turned from red to green, then from green to red. After changing several times, he suddenly raised his head and spat out a mouthful of old blood. He fell on his back. "Oh my God! Someone come quickly!" The big cousin gloated and shouted. The eunuch spat out blood again. Then his voice was swallowed by the mighty and rumbling melody. No one cared. Such generous joy turned into a torrential rain, swallowing everything along with the melody. On the stage, Huaishe roared. The blade of the axe slashed down and collided with the prince's long sword. With the thunderous roar of the organ, countless rays of light continued to emerge from his body. The blessings from the Creator turned into pop-up windows that appeared around him. Bear's tenacity, ox's strength, cat's elegance, dark vision, eagle's dignity, owl's wisdom, arrow protection, deflecting force field, pure technique, stable confidence, weapon extension, heroic spirit possession, snake's agility. The powerful blessings from the border's dark net continued to flash. Every moment, every second, countless buffs fell from the sky, layer upon layer. In the end, his surroundings almost turned into a sea of overlapping pop-up windows that endlessly increased his strength. In the end, in a trance, Huaishe felt as if he had turned into a giant and trampled the world under his feet. The blade of the spear pierced and repelled the prince's attack. A hurricane was set off, and countless irises spread and grew. From among them, the burning mountain ghost suddenly jumped up and slashed the axe at the enemy from the air. The Pegasus wailed and was smashed down several meters under this attack. It landed on the ground and flapped its wings in vain, but it could no longer rise into the sky. The prince reached out and gently stroked its mane, comforting the fear in its heart. When he raised his eyes to look at Huaishe, he could not hide his shock and admiration. Such a magical power. What magic is this? Don't you know, Your Highness? Huaishe grinned and laughed happily. Friendship is magic. Chapter 238. Thank you to Alliance Master Nakajima Kaze for your support. I should have written it in the title, but the title was too short for me to write. Friendship is magic, right? The prince was stunned for a long time. Then he slowly nodded and agreed from the bottom of his heart. Well said. This actually made Huaishe, who had stolen lines from children's cartoons, feel apologetic. He didn't refuse the precious time Huaishe gave him to breathe. The prince calmly adjusted his posture and raised his head again as his people sang. His face was glowing. This kind of battle is really delightful. Huaishe, why didn't we get to know each other earlier? He sighed wistfully. A little earlier, a long, long time ago. If only we could have gotten to know each other on that land, gotten to know each other, and explored together. How good would that have been? Although I am very grateful for Your Highness' deep friendship, shouldn't these words be better said by a girl? Huaishe shrugged. Don't look at me like this. I'm actually quite a good teammate. That's really a pity. The prince laughed softly. The white horse let out a long neigh. Its iron hooves slammed against the ground, and it spat out a line of blazing breath. Its wings suddenly unfurled, and its feathers transformed into rays of light. Pure and holy wings of light unfurled from this hell, and it greeted the enemy with a pure and hearty smile. Then let us begin again. Okay. The grand melody of the ode of joy rose once again. Huaishe unsheathed his blade, an axe. With a thunderous roar, he madly charged forward. Endless power poured into his body. He felt as if he had turned into light. Everywhere he passed, origin substance spread wildly across the ground, causing the grass seeds that had fallen from the broken bag to germinate and grow. Immediately after, countless towering trees grew. In the blink of an eye, the withering and flourishing transformed into a solemn and cold forest. The mountain ghost roared and stepped on the trees that grew out of the ground. It galloped towards the sky and chopped down with its axe. The blade swept horizontally. A thunderous roar burst forth from the sky. The white horse neighed, and its wings of light shook again, forcefully suppressing Huaishe's attack. Immediately after, An even more solemn power surged from the prince's body. The cracks on his handsome face cracked, and the pair of azure eyes became even more serene and profound. The prince was burning. Pure light condensed on the blade of the sword, and an iron-like majesty burst forth from it. It was incomparably sharp. Huaisher felt his wrist tremble violently. A crack appeared on the blade of the axe that was reinforced by layers of power, and a terrible scratch was left on the back of the sacrificial knife. He was sent flying. The Pegasus spread its wings and chased after him. The prince raised his sword and slashed again. However, in midair, Huaisher seemed to have given up on resisting. He stretched his limbs and exhaled the hot air in his chest. In the next moment, dark green flames burst forth from his eyes. It was like the reflection of the scorching sun. Phantoms broke free from the body, each holding a knife and an axe, and faced the incoming prince. The mountain ghost roared and spat out 3 feet long cold flames from its mouth. From his hand, the chain whizzed out and tied around the neck of the Pegasus. Then the long spear, short knife, and sharp axe burst forth with a roar. The low echoes turned into a rhythm, overlapping in one place, perfectly blending into the climax of the Ode of Joy. A chord, with the support given by Lily, Huaisher could now release a move like the Xiang Dragon after little preparation. It was unstoppable. The white horse neighed tragically. A crack appeared on its neck, and blood spurted out. The prince's sword was suddenly shaken by Huaisher's slash, and the tip of the sword flew horizontally and fell to the ground. It was broken. The white horse spread its wings and stopped in the sky. The prince raised his sword in astonishment and stared at the broken sword. Soon, a trace of admiration appeared on his face. With this strike, I will repay you for your amazing skills. Huaisher, my challenger. In the sky above the stage, he stared at the falling young man. He slowly raised the sword in his hand and declared loudly, "With all my soul dedicated to this sword, virtue will exist with my legend, in the impassioned chorus, in the praises of the people and the expectations of the young girls." A pillar of light rose from the sword. The light was like a flame, wrapping around the broken blade and rising upwards like a banner of light. It soared into the sky, leaving behind a slender trail that was engraved in everyone's eyes. The mighty sound of the horn burst forth, announcing the prince's bravery and strength to the world, praising the divine power and valiance of the sword. Great spirit of the gods, with this sword as the proof. The prince shouted, and the banner of light was raised high. Virtue and hope burst forth with endless light, and the pure and dazzling light occupied the only main axis between heaven and earth. With the prince's loud declaration, the huge burning sword of light slashed down. The mighty long night ends here. It was the torrent of light that burst out from the blade of the sword. It moved forward in a straight line and would rather break than bend. With an indomitable aura, it destroyed all obstacles in its way as easily as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. This bearing was the embodiment of virtue and integrity from the heart, and this power was where the nobility was. Just by watching, one could understand the hope that figure had placed on it. Just by listening, one would lower one's head in the impassioned declaration. The eternal long night was broken with one slash. Immediately, the sky was filled with light. In the dead silence, even the joyous and blessings filled with joy and blessings were broken by this sword's roar. Countless blessings and buffs were destroyed by this single slash. The majestic dense forest fell apart under the illumination of the light, and the forest was broken in half. All darkness was purified. The long night ended here. Dawn arrived. This was a natural counter to the power of darkness. There were no blind spots or gaps in this terrifying attack, tearing apart all darkness and announcing the arrival of light. When the rising smoke and ashes gradually dissipated in the wind blew away the smoke and ashes that had been burned out. Behind the layers of broken barriers, Huaisher's thin figure slowly raised her head. A cracking sound came from her broken face, as if she was about to completely fall apart. Countless strands of dark origin substance began to slowly dissipate from his body, the transformation between life and death. So that's how it is. Huaisher's lips opened and closed, and the fragments peeled off from his face. As the corners of his mouth curled up, he revealed a smile of understanding. So that's how it is. From his naked upper body, in the crack on his chest, the fire that was gradually extinguished was replaced by a new flame that rose up once again. Where his blood dripped, a withered yellow grass gradually grew out from the crack in the stage. Illusory dew dripped down, landing on Huaisher's broken palm. Thus, in an instant, the crack on his palm gradually healed. This was the true power and miracle of the mountain ghost sacred mark. It wasn't assimilating death, but rather embracing death. It wasn't stealing life force, but rather coexisting. It was different from the Een soul, which constantly absorbed negative origin substances to bring itself closer to death. This life that was obtained through self-destruction pursued a form that was closest to the essence of life. After discarding all of the meaningless burdens, the pure flow of life force was realized. It was like water rising from high to low, from many to few. Through this borrowing and repayment, an inconceivable miracle could be created in a short period of time that couldn't even be described as a single thought. It was like a small amount of money flowing in before the account was closed, after all the numbers in the account were deducted. Even if it was only 0.0001 RMB, it was still an important indicator to distinguish between something that existed and something that didn't. Even if the massive body and lush leaves on the surface were burned to the ground, as long as there was a line of roots, life could continue. It could grow again, germinate, survive the long winter, and welcome the grand opening. It wasn't until all of the origin substances had evaporated that Huaisher comprehended the essence of the sacred mark's transformation. Chapter 239. The Requiem, which buried all souls, was played here. The Doomsday Sutra, which brought the final judgment and redemption, was played to the climax. As if thousands of people were chanting and singing, the power of the Creator transformed in the melody. Countless laws collided violently in the passionate rhythm, emitting a dazzling light. In Huaisher's hands, the knife and axe had turned from tangible to intangible. It was difficult to distinguish their outlines with the naked eye. Endless lightning burst out from them, ravaging the air and the line of sight. It stung every pair of eyes, making people bow their heads and unable to look directly at the grace of God. It was as if judgment had descended. It descended on the tip of the young man's index finger. Countless bolts of lightning shot out from within, lashing out at everything in the mortal world. As he moved forward, he tore everything apart as easily as crushing dry weeds. The day of fury had arrived. This power is truly a miracle. You are even stronger than I imagined. In the sky, the prince held the still burning sword tightly. His face was illuminated by the lightning, but his green eyes were full of joy and expectation. The Pegasus was neighing. Countless feathers exploded from its wings, stirring up a hurricane. Carrying the light that had not been extinguished, it swooped down with the prince's roar. A straight line was outlined in the void. In the roar, the stage wailed and shook violently. Lightning and light collided, illuminating the faces of the two. The same excited smile. Huaisher took a deep breath and roared. Lightning swept out, smashing apart the sword that was descending from the sky. She raised her blade and slashed down. Bang! A shield with a lion's head appeared on the prince's arm, resisting the impact of the lightning. Even in the wandering lightning, strands of golden hair were burned to ashes. "You don't mind, do you?" Behind the shield, the prince laughed. "I thought I wouldn't need it. If I knew, I would have brought a spear." I should be the one saying that. Huaishur stared into the prince's eyes and raised his eyebrows slightly. "After all, it looks expensive." Boom! The drummer exerted his strength. From a close distance, the blade suddenly trembled and once again cut inwards to a depth of 2 fingers. A crack appeared on the relief sculpture of the lion head. Then the prince lifted the axe with his broken sword and swung it towards Huaishur's neck. In the instant that Huaishur blocked, the heavenly horse neighed, and its iron hooves rose. But soon after, with a flash of lightning, it was sent flying backwards with a wail. The wings were broken. Thunderbolts, which were like divine punishment, lashed its body. In an instant, it destroyed its defense and body, disintegrating the power of the Pegasus from the inside out. Heavy injuries. The feathers of light fell to the ground and melted. The whining white horse struggled with great difficulty. It raised its face and rubbed against its master's arm. Reluctantly, it dissipated. The prince climbed up from the ground in a sorry state, as if he wanted to stroke its mane for the last time, but he hesitated and withdrew his hand. The hand holding the sword trembled slightly. They watched it leave in silence. After a long time, he raised his lowered eyes and slowly took a step back. He took one last look at the place where the white horse dissipated, turned around, and walked towards the boy holding the thunderbolt in front of him. "Come on, Huaishur," he whispered softly and raised the broken sword and the cracked shield. "Let us put an end to this long night." "Yes, I think so too." Huaishur looked at him quietly. For some reason, he no longer smiled. He just clenched the thunderbolt and the weapon in his hand tightly and let them burn his palms and arms with a sizzling sound. Soon, he took a step forward and whispered softly, "Soon I will free you from this nightmare." At that moment, the roars of the prince and the mountain ghost rang out. On the stage that was riddled with holes. In the wail of the falling sky burning, thunder and light collided with a roar. There was no more opportunity for change, no more time for hypocrisy, and no space to retreat or dodge. In the collision of the mighty song and the melody, light and thunder erupted from their hands. The sword, the axe, and the shield set off a loud roar. In the pure power and speed, they showed their ferocity and dignity. Slash, block, pierce, and attack again. The battle was presented here in the most barbaric and direct way. With the roar and roar, the fragments of the sword and the knife flew. The shield fell apart. Huaishur roared, suppressing the darkness in front of him and the pain in his soul. The axe fell. Bang! The sword fell out of his hand and flew backward. But the prince did not panic. Instead, he clenched his fists and stood still in his dizziness. He took a step back and forced himself to straighten his body. Then, he used all his strength to launch a final attack on the opponent in front of him. Only a hair's breadth away, under the restraint of the chains, the broken iron fist left an unreachable distance from Huaishur's face. Huaishur stepped forward. He crashed into him. The sacrificial knife pierced the prince's chest and came out from his back. Then, the mighty sound of the bell burst out from the sky. In the roar, the mighty announcement spread in all directions. Behind the curtain, the girl's sad song came to an abrupt end. Under the witness of all the audience, in front of countless pairs of shocked and sorrowful eyes. The victory and defeat had been decided. "It's over, Your Highness." Huaishur whispered in the prince's ear, "The long tour and adventure has come to an end." He said, "You can rest now. Is that so?" The prince laughed hoarsely. "We've just met, and it's time to say goodbye." What a pity. He fell awkwardly. Huaishir supported him and leaned him on the broken platform. He wanted to say something, but he felt his hand being held tightly. The pale hand was stained with sticky blood. The once handsome prince held the wrist of the young man in front of him. His eyes were still as gentle as before. Congratulations, Huaishir, you've defeated me. From now on, you're the new prince, he gasped and asked softly. But what kind of prince do you want to be? To be honest, I haven't thought about it yet. After a long silence, Huaishir scratched his head and didn't know how to answer. But I think, since I'm so happy, I'll be the happy prince, right? For some reason, the prince couldn't help but laugh out loud. He coughed violently. Haha, it sounds, ahem, very unreliable. Yeah, I also think I'm unreliable. Huaishir sighed. How can a shameless guy like me be qualified to be a prince? If I'm reduced to being a prostitute and working in a KTV in the future, will you think I'm unreasonable? At that time, will you still treat us monsters as equals? Maybe. Huaishir shook his head self-deprecatingly. Maybe no one will like me at that time. You see, no matter how popular I am, the popularity will eventually pass. When I'm no longer popular, I may really have to rely on everyone to feed me. Then, will you save the innocent people? The prince coughed and looked at his face. Will you uphold justice and help those who ask you for help? It's hard to say. Huaishir smiled bitterly. After all, sometimes I don't have a good life. If I want to help others, I have to take care of myself first, right? But his hand was held tightly by the prince, so tightly as if he was afraid that he would run away and disappear. In a daze, the prince spoke in a hoarse voice. His eyes were full of hope. Then, will you still be a hero? Of course. Huaishir nodded seriously. A person should have some goals, right? That's good. That's great. As if his wish had been fulfilled, the prince whispered softly. His smile was as if he had been released. Don't. Walk into that good night peacefully. Huaishir, don't be like us. A cold iron block was stuffed into Huaishir's hand. Using the last of his strength, regardless of the boy's astonishment, he placed his broken sword between his 5 fingers so that he could hold it tightly and not loosen it. This was the last inheritance. Farewell. He bowed his head and said goodbye to the boy. Your Highness, Huaishir was stunned in place. In the gradually dissipating sound of the bell, the former prince smiled and gradually turned into light, rising into the sky, blending into the beautiful neon lights in the amusement park. He disappeared. At that moment, an illusory light appeared on top of Huaishir's head, outlining a gorgeous crown, solemn and noble. From the audience, including Kitten, countless leaders of Yamatai City stood up, bowed their heads to the new prince, and bowed to him. From today onwards, he was the new prince. Following another announcement of the bell, all of the audience gradually dissipated, returning to their original positions. As they left, streaks of pure origin substance floated in the air, condensing into tiny crystals that looked like precious gems. The large golden amber was a gift from the Happy Heart Frame. The large black gems were left behind by the leaders of the large groups, and the countless fine crystals were the origin substances left behind by the ascendants. Then, all of them fell into Kitten's pocket. A perfect performance, a perfect ending. Huaishir, you've done something only you can do. Kitten lowered his head to look at the countless origin substance crystals in his pocket, finally letting out a sigh of relief. Otherwise, who knows how long it would take to gather all of the joy and sorrow left behind by the audience. So, all of this was planned by you? Huaishir raised his head to look at him, not knowing if he should be angry or grateful. You planned all of this so that I could participate in this stage play? This is also the will of the park. Kitten calmly replied. I believe that the prince will also agree with my decision. Come to my office later. I'll be waiting for you there." Without waiting for Huaishir to react, he held the bag of beautiful gems and hurriedly left, leaving Huaishir alone to face his own problems. In the silence, Huaishir turned his head, looking at the curtain in front of the stage, one step away. But for some reason, he didn't dare to move forward, hesitating, afraid that he would be disappointed in the end. In the end, Huaishir finally gathered his courage and lifted the curtain. Then he saw that mocking and arrogant face, the eyes cruel and fierce. Yes, a hand-drawn picture of Brother Wudong pinned to the door frame. It was so lifelike. That young lady looks quite shy. In the already empty stage, Feng Shu, who had been waiting for a long time, sighed. Because she didn't know what to say to you, she hesitated for a long time and quietly ran away. I wanted to keep her for a while, but this doesn't look like a place to talk, so there's nothing I can do. After a long silence, Huaishir raised the picture in his hand with a wry smile, as if he could see the sly expression of the girl when she was drawing it. "You're really something, Lily." He shook his head and stopped talking. He didn't know if he should be happy for her existence or disappointed for her departure. Ahem. Feng Shu lowered his head and coughed, interrupting Huaishir's disappointment. But before she left, I gave her the phone number of the Stone Marrow Museum and your contact information. Huaishir was stunned in place, unable to believe it. "Feng Shu?" "Yes." Chapter 240. Feng Shu didn't chat with Huaishir for too long. After briefly reporting the situation to the youth, he said that there was no need to worry about the family, and that the young master could participate in the competition without worry. Then, in order to prepare for the floor waxing this year, the old man hurriedly left through the door. Huaishir was left in amazement at the door. This thing was simply too awesome. It could actually call people to provide live support and play background music at any time and place. It was simply a divine artifact. If he pried it down and installed it in his house, Huaishir began to imagine, but under the faint pressure of the paradise, he reluctantly gave up the idea. This was probably also part of the paradise's mechanism, relying on the hell here to exist. Even if he moved the entire kitten paradise to the present realm, it would probably be useless. After sending off Feng Shu, Huaishir sat at the performance table and looked at the only relic left by the prince, the broken longsword. After leaving its former owner, it had lost its previous dazzling luster. The dark golden emblems and decorations on the sword's spine had also gradually faded. When it landed in his hand, it was a broken blade that was far heavier than he had imagined. The blade was still sharp. It was cold to the touch, and the whole person seemed to calm down, forever calm and composed. But no matter how much source substance was injected, it couldn't reproduce the divine power and brilliance in the hands of the former prince. It was puzzling, until Huaishir finally remembered Crow's small identification encyclopedia. He summoned the Book of Destiny and placed it together with the broken blade. After a subtle exchange of source substance, the Book of Destiny moved without wind, and the pages quickly flipped. As the catalogue of the former kingdom of heaven, it recorded the carrier of countless miracles. Naturally, it had previous experience for comparison and identification. In the blink of an eye, the results were displayed on the page. Huaishir was stunned in place. Border relic, sword of virtue. The straight blade showed the user's courage and virtue, and also conveyed a warning from a nameless prince to his successor. "My heart is like a sword, and I would rather break than bend." Recalling the prince's last words before his death, Huaishir stroked the sword ridge and sighed. "Don't walk gently into that good night. Don't walk gently into that good night. Old age should burn and roar at sunset. Roar, roar, and berate the light for retreating. Berate the light for fading away." Recalling the poem that he had vaguely read, Huaisha realized that this might be the last warning that the prince left for him, a lesson for the lost people. Even if fate is rough and the world is cold and indifferent, do not follow the call of the abyss and fall into the darkness, even if death is inevitable. With a flick of her finger, a drop of illusory blood flew out, and the silver feather pen, Elephant Branch, was stained with blood and quickly wrote on the page. Although the essence has been polluted by hell and is no longer the same as before, these are all excellent fragments of the Origin Codex. Moreover, they are perfectly compatible with the branch of Kingdom of Heaven. I just need to tidy them up a bit. After a short few seconds, there was no need for Elephant Branch to write again. The densely packed words on the page seemed to have a life of their own and began to grow rapidly. Countless characters appeared and tangled together, but they quickly became orderly under Kingdom of Heaven's tidying. With the writing of the Book of Destiny on the surrounding thrones, all the crystals left behind by the princes also let out a clear sound and turned into a faint glow. They gathered in one place and fell between the slender white fingers. A storm descended. It was a phenomenon formed by the surge of a large amount of origin substance. Countless origin substances poured into the light in a frenzy. In the end, a gap opened up in the ceiling above her head. From the gap in the distance, the faint glow of the silver sea fell down. As if something had been awakened, a mighty whale's song came from the endless sea that gathered all the knowledge of Homo sapiens. Soon, the huge restriction was disturbed. The framework created by dozens of creators began to operate on its own, investigating the abnormalities and looking for the source of the phenomenon. The gap had already closed before that, leaving no trace behind. Only the faint glow in Crow's hand had condensed into a substance, turning into the crystal outline of a young girl. It was as bright as a diamond and reflected a sparkling glow. It was a complete stigmata. Oh, what a pleasant surprise. The guys from Golden Dawn didn't take this away? Ah, that's right. After all, they're a group of fat otakus without the heart of a young girl. This is really a big gain. She raised her eyebrows thoughtfully. Soon, a happy smile appeared on her face, and she threw the stigmata in her hand out. The stigmata flew in the air and hovered, as if it had sensed something. It trembled excitedly. After a clear sound, it turned into a faint glow and broke through the air. In the darkness, Crow stared quietly into the distance, as if she could see a fool's future unlucky appearance. Her smile became gloating. I'm really looking forward to it. What kind of expression will he have when the time comes? With a smug snort, the big sister turned around and disappeared into the darkness. What kind of expression is that young man? In the dirty office, Kitten raised her arms and cheered for the tired Huaisha. You've completed the task and are about to win the reward. Come, get high with me. Get high. What's more, you're the new prince. If people see you like this, what will happen to the image of our amusement park? Does this lousy amusement park still have any image? Huaisha sighed and pointed to the shining crown of light on his head. Also, can you turn off this light for me? It's making my eyes hurt. This is manual. You have to adjust it yourself. Kitten handed him a remote control, then poured him a cup of black tea and put it in front of him enthusiastically. It was a pity that the teacup hadn't been washed for many years. There was even cigarette ash in it. It smelled so bad that people didn't want to drink it at all. You already knew, right? Huaisha asked. Kitten laughed. I guessed a little, but I think this difficulty is still within the scope of your ability, right, Mr. Legendary Investigator? Your achievements and ability are indeed worthy of your reputation. Don't bother with these fancy words. I'm still feeling a little sad right now. Although he knew that Prince Charming only had one night to live, and even without him, he would disappear in the morning, killing an opponent who could have been a friend, made Huaisha feel terrible. Don't worry. You've also helped him escape. In this hell, some people are like fish in water and never get tired of it, but for others, even a moment longer is torture. They and he aren't suitable for this kind of environment. Isn't it good to help them retire? In the end, he was still very grateful to you. Why sure didn't want to pay attention to him anymore. He just stretched out his hand and gestured for him to hurry up and give out the reward. Kitten shrugged and placed two things on the table: the ring and the envelope. They're all yours. Huaisha was silent for a long time. He shook off the heavy feeling in his heart and reached out to take the ring first. Sensing his source substance, the gray color on the ring faded in an instant and turned into a gorgeous and resplendent golden color, which made people gasp in amazement. When the ring was worn on the 10 fingers of his left hand, it began to quickly extract Huaisha's source substance, like a powerful water pump in a bottomless pit. In the blink of an eye, Huaisha's massive stockpile of origin substance was almost completely drained. Immediately afterward, the mountain ghost's sacred mark that connected the soul and the body began to grow rapidly, evolving into a brand new structure that Huaisha had never thought of before. It smoothly and naturally connected to the ring. It was like adding a new peripheral to a computer. Huaisha didn't even have time to react. He didn't even need to install a drive. It directly connected perfectly. Wait a minute, this thing seemed to have the same origin as his sacred mark. In an instant, the ring had lost its shape and turned into a line of hot golden characters that merged into Huaisha's index finger. It looked like a circle of tattoos. Chapter 241. Oh, this dazzling golden light. And such a smooth resonance. It's a perfect match for you. Small Cat sighed and said, "This is one of the only 3 army contracts in the game, and it's perfectly compatible with your stats. You don't even need to ask someone to modify it. Your luck is really good. Congratulations, congratulations." Huaisha responded vaguely, but he did not respond. Huaisha knew very little about the army contracts. He had only vaguely heard some bits and pieces from Crow. This kind of strategic relic that was crazily collected and stored by large organizations was definitely not an ordinary item. Although he did not know the details, he was certain that this item was definitely related to the celestial genealogy. No, it seemed to be specially created to match his path of ascension. From his long experience of being tricked by his teammates, he looked at the kitten in front of him suspiciously and felt that something was wrong. What's the situation? The kitten did not seem to notice and looked at him curiously. "You look very pale. Do you want me to go to the kitchen and cook a bowl of noodles for—" "Ah, I forgot that you're a trainee chef. Pretend I didn't say anything." Huaisha carefully sensed the ring in his hand. It was indeed a rather complicated border relic. The internal structure was layered and could not be understood. However, after extracting his own origin substance, it seemed as if something was being nurtured in the darkness within his body. But it needed a large amount of life force to make up for it. Of course, Huaisha wouldn't use her own life to feed it. She was only thinking of finding a forest to nourish herself after she got out. But he felt that something was not right. This seemed to be a half-finished product, but it was indeed the most suitable equipment for him. There was no feeling of awkwardness or resistance at all. It was as if it had become a part of his body and resonated with his breathing. Did he make a mistake? Soon, Huaisha stopped paying attention to this problem and looked at the last reward. Envelope. He carefully picked up the envelope. It felt ordinary, as if there was a card inside. The Book of Destiny sensed it and trembled slightly. After Huaisha carefully opened the envelope, he found that a badge fell out. Yes, it seems to be a work certificate from somewhere. There was also the logo of the Astronomical Society on the back. When Huaisha picked up the card and wanted to look at the front, A wisp of origin substance was sucked out of him. Immediately afterwards, a picture of his face appeared on the originally blank front. Ideal Nation, 14th Pilot Zone, Authorization Certificate. In addition to the photo, Weischer's name slowly appeared below it, indicating that he had B-level access to most areas. Immediately after, the Book of Destiny trembled. As the pages of the book flipped, the letter was erased and the blue card turned pitch black. I was injured and I almost died. Even if it's not a work injury, you should at least give me some overtime pay, right? Then, I'll give you Judge Jean, and we'll pretend nothing happened. Ha! Weischer weighed the bulging wallet and smiled mockingly. Do I lack that money? His rich face was really detestable. The kitten smoked and suddenly had a headache. In the end, she stuffed the cigarette but into the small mountain in the ashtray and sighed helplessly. How about this? She coughed and said cautiously, when necessary, how about the park help you once? Seeing that Weischer was still not satisfied, she said again, according to the agreement, in the rules of your competition, we can't intervene too much. But you are the part-time prince of the park, so the park has an excuse to intervene. It's not a serious violation, but it's best not to go too far. Otherwise, we will be listed in the future. Help me once. Weischer frowned. How? The kitten rummaged through the cabinets and took out a flyer from the cabinet. This is for you. The color of the flyer was almost faded, and the handwriting couldn't be seen clearly. Only a cartoon version of the kitten's head that occupied a large area still had the outline of the past. When she held the flyer in her hand, the kitten's movements were cautious and careful, as if she was holding a bomb. Carefully, she said, the park was very pleased with your performance on the stage and expressed appreciation, so they gave you such permission. You have to use it carefully. Weischer took the flyer and looked at it carefully, confused. How do I use it? It's very simple. The kitten pointed to the cartoon version of her head on the flyer and said, as long as you are in this city, no matter when or where, as long as you draw this pattern on the ground according to it, you can summon the power sleeping in the depths of the park, the most terrifying monster here. Speaking of this, the kitten sneered. You don't have to doubt the specific power. When it falls from the sky, all the people present who haven't paid the license fee will die. Weischer took a breath of cold air, and the hair all over his body stood up. This was a large-scale AoE, but he didn't know how effective it was. But since it was the most terrifying monster in this park, thinking of the dark aura he felt in the castle, he couldn't help but shiver. Terrifying, after extorting 2 sets of hospitality vouchers from the kitten that could be used to stay in other hotels in the city at any time. Weischer felt that this was the right level. After all, the kitten was quite good to him, and he didn't suffer any losses, although he always felt that the kitten was a little suspicious. But he was leaving tomorrow. Could the kitten still catch up to him and cut him down? Weischer thought for a while, put away the things, got up, and left to sleep in the dormitory arranged for him. In the office, watching Weischer close the door and listening to the young man's footsteps gradually fading away, the kitten finally breathed a sigh of relief, lay on the chair, and sighed softly. He opened the drawer and looked at the prize that was originally assigned to the first place by the Shinue framework. Oh, I almost exposed myself. So close, so close. Casually, he threw an important army contract into the trash can. After that, he crossed his legs, lit a cigarette happily, picked up the telephone next to him, and dialed a number. Hello, Golden Dawn? He smoked and said happily, yes, I have already given the badge to the foreign sublimator of the Abyss lineage. Did you watch the live broadcast? Yes, that's it. Isn't it very powerful and domineering? Shouldn't you pay more? 3 times? Is the prince of our park worth 3 times? About 10 times, right? Okay, that's it. Transfer the money to my magic gold bank account later. After hanging up the phone, the kitten dialed another number, picked it up, and waited for it to be connected. Hello, yesterday's delivery? It's Manager Lee, right? He said, Yes, I have already given the ring to the successor prince. Oh, you're too polite, don't mention money. I'm also an old acquaintance of the chairman of Seven Seas. You may need to pay more attention to the packaging service later. Okay, come to the door as soon as possible. The phone hung up again. Finally, he picked it up again and broadcast another number. This time, the busy tone of the response was exceptionally long. Even the rhythm of the busy tone was stretched to the limit, making people think that there would be no reply until the end of time. 5 minutes later, the phone was picked up again. Hello, Helios Workshop? The kitten put out the cigarette, nodded, and said, Yes, the border relic you left here has found its owner. It's that chain. It's absolutely suitable. You can rest assured of my judgment. It's simply the most perfect successor. There's no need for money, but there will be something I need your help with in a few days. Is it convenient? Then it's settled. Okay, be there or be square. The receiver was put down, and the phone hung up. In the silence, he fell into deep thought. After a long time, he raised his eyes and looked at the darkness in the corner of the desk. Are you satisfied with this arrangement, customer? If you want to say that I'm satisfied, it's better to say that I'm amazed. In the darkness, an emotional voice came. Although it's true that doing business has to make money, isn't this one fish for $5 a bit too amazing? Crow raised his red eyes and clicked his tongue in wonder. Chapter 242. Should I say that he's worthy of being a big capitalist tycoon? The black bird exclaimed. Other than using the title of a prince to earn a large number of tickets, his final salary was paid by someone else, and he even sold a favor. He's insane to such an extent that even I, as a crow, can't help but admit defeat. It can't be helped. The people in hell are in dire straits. Customer. Kitten picked up the black tea that Why-Sure didn't drink and calmly poured it into her mouth. It's not easy to make money in this world. If you don't seize the opportunity, you might suddenly go bankrupt one day. At that time, everyone will be living on the streets, and they might not even be able to eat a fart. Besides, if it weren't for your strong recommendation, I wouldn't have the courage to make this decision. I'm just a matchmaker. Crow began to praise each other. If we're talking about operations, you're still better than me. It's just, Kitten was silent for a moment and suddenly asked, in addition to the anonymous package that was handed to me 7 years ago, the inheritance ceremony of the Helios Workshop and the Golden Dawn badge are a bit too dangerous for him, right? Oh, Crow was amused. Are you worried about him? He is the Prince of Paradise, my colleague. Why wouldn't I care? Kitten shook her head. If you want to say it, I can't wait for him to become stronger and more powerful so that Paradise can rely on him in the future. Anyone would want him to have a smooth sailing future, right? Don't worry. Although the inheritance ceremony of the Helios Workshop is dangerous, it is a rare opportunity for him after a year. As for the Golden Dawn, Crow shook his head. They have been developing members among other celestial genealogies, ascendants, for a long time. Even if there is no opportunity, he will have to deal with those fat otakus sooner or later. So, why not take the initiative first? How about it? Are you interested in joining? She said happily, it will be much more convenient to cooperate with an outstanding operator like you, right? Forget it. Although Paradise is big, compared to real power, it is just yesterday's illusion. Kitten shook her head. We don't ask for glory as long as we can continue to live like this. Really? Crow looked at him deeply. I can understand that it's not easy to survive in the cracks, but I'm curious, why are you in such a hurry? With your position, you don't need to make arrangements in such a hurry, do you? Anyway, Paradise is one of the few big groups in Yamatai City. Why don't you just wait for Dong Xia and Ingzhou to make an offer? The cat fell into silence. After a long time, he sighed softly. To be honest, I'm not interested in the conflict between the Eastern Summer lineage and the Ingzhou lineage. I just don't want to live under someone else's roof. After all, we've already lost our lives and our former honor. After unscrewing the pen, a slender fox came out. After eating 2 beans, it flashed and disappeared with a short letter in its mouth. Not long after, the old man's consciousness suddenly darkened, as if he was falling down and fell into the darkness. At the end of the darkness was a vast and cold river. Between the clusters of vermilion garlic flowers, a gloomy palace stood on the white bone plain. The old man's consciousness instantly fell into the deepest part of the palace and saw several shadows waiting there. At the highest position, the figure behind the curtain was motionless as if he was sleeping. Only the handsome man under the throne said, "We already know the details. You went to Dongxia with a sick body. Thank you for your hard work." The old man respectfully bowed his head and replied, "Thank you for your concern, Your Majesty. I am just talking about what I should do." Under the throne, the man pondered for a moment and suddenly said, "Regarding Yamatai City, Your Majesty is free to make arrangements. But now, there is an important matter to ask of you." The old Zhong Naiyan crawled on the ground and kowtowed to the throne. "I will be crushed to pieces to repay Your Majesty's kindness." Then he heard the man's calm voice. "Since you have decided to go with a sick body, you have already realized it, right?" After a short silence, the old man's fingers trembled. Then his whole body began to tremble. Soon, under the gaze of the handsome man, the old man deeply bowed his head. "I understand." "Very good." Under the throne, the man slowly closed the paper fan. The old man's consciousness became blurry. When he opened his eyes, he was already back in the deathly silent ward. Nothing had changed. Only in his hand there was a small bottle, the underworld medicine. He slowly propped himself up and stared at the bottle in his hand. After a long time, he silently smiled bitterly. He raised the bottle, raised his head, and drank it. But there was no cold feeling coming from his mouth. Empty? After a long time, he opened his eyes in shock and found that there was a huge wok in front of his mouth. He didn't know when it had appeared. Steadily, the wok caught the underworld medicine in the bottle. Not a single drop was spilled. What is Lord Zhong Naiyan doing? Unknowingly, the big cousin who had appeared in front of the window lowered his head, holding the wok in his hand, and smiled brightly at the old man. "This cannot be." Looking at that smile, the old man's lips quivered as if he wanted to say something. But in the end, the thousands of words that came to his mouth only turned into a bitter laugh. He collapsed weakly on the bed. It was as if his whole body had lost its strength. What is this? After all the scheming, he still fell into Kongming's trap. He tiredly lowered his eyes. This time, things are not good. Time passed quickly. Under the acceleration of the Xinyue framework, Yamatai City had already welcomed the nothingness of the morning sun 3 times. The sky was bright. The short night had once again ended. There were too many intense battles that the eyes could not take in, especially the miraculous stage performance at the end. It belonged to the battle between the princes. Who knows how many young and old ladies in the audience were so excited that they left nosebleeds. Before the battle had even ended, there was already a picture of Prince X on the dark net. In an instant, the click rate soared to the highest in the Dojinshi area. Among them, there was also an unknown crow lady and a mysterious registered scholar whose ID started with H, who quietly liked it. And after the battle ended, the 16 large online casinos on the dark net began to crazily suck in money. The amount of money that bet on Weischer actually squeezed into the top 3 for a time. At the peak, it surpassed the original second place, the mysterious person who until now had his face covered and did not reveal his identity. He even almost attacked Yi Shui's original first-place position. But unfortunately, the sudden burst did not have enough momentum. Under the originally slow rise of first and second place, after 4 hours, Weischer fell back to third place. The biggest reason was that Di Ting smiled and did not release any information about Weischer. The Tomorrow's News also planned to release some evil tricks to manipulate the odds. Although the identity of a legendary investigator could be bought with a little more money, but Weischer's own rank and the way he fought alone made it difficult for him to attract more attention in this intense group competition. With the arrival of dawn, after a long day and night of competition, all the important area's attack data surfaced. Mitsukoshi Building. The attack completion rate was 100%. There were 41 winners. The Dongsha Social Security Bureau, led by Yi Shui, firmly held 4 dark gold items, 11 border relics, and an army contract in their hands. Sensoji, the attack completion rate was 61%. There were 22 winners. The Ingzhou Chabal Sodom group obtained 2 dark gold treasure chests and an army contract after a tragic victory. The defeated Rinxia Hall decisively changed the focus of the attack and obtained 40% of the attack completion rate of Ami Hungding, obtaining 4 border relics and a dark gold treasure chest. Kitten Paradise, the attack completion rate was 92%. There were 24 winners. Basically, every project host who survived to the end received a clear reward. However, Weischer alone accounted for more than 40% of the total, of which 10% came from the crazy hunting in the revival match, and 30% was the effect of the hidden mission and the prince title of the kitten. The mysterious masked guest barged into the arena alone. He relied on 2 dark gold items and the strange ability of the stigmata to fight against 10. He almost wiped out the 3 teams on the arena and occupied 70% of the completion rate alone. He obtained a stigmata relic. As the statistics rolled, soon it reached the end. Akihabara, which was ranked in the top 5 of all the areas, had a completion rate of 92%. There were a total of 13 winners. For a moment, everyone was stunned. There were only 13 people. 13 people completed the Akihabara, which was known for its large number of missions and complicated content, and pushed the attack completion rate to 92%. It was like a miracle. Could it be that there was an elite team behind them? Then, on the screen, the number jumped. It became 12. Chapter 243. 12 before the audience could react. The number seemed to have dived into the water and dropped by another place. 11, then 10, 9, 5. For amidst the shocked clamor of the audience, the number of winners dropped rapidly until it finally stopped at 1. There was only one person left. The Harken opened its mouth in shock and waved its hand, and the camera in the director's room immediately focused on the streets of Akihabara, revealing a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. Death piled up like a mountain. The streams of blood converged into a river, running wantonly on the wide asphalt road. Everything was dyed red, representing the end. It was a scene of devastation. Every single place was shattered and dilapidated. Tyrannical devastation descended upon this place, and no survivors were able to snatch away the hurricane of death. As death approached them step by step, everyone could only hug each other in fear. Then, they were buried in the darkness. In the dead silence, only the crisp sound of high heels hitting the ground could be heard. With a gentle brush of his finger, the wall shattered with a loud bang. Countless dust and debris flew up at any time, but not a single speck dared to touch the smooth and clean surface of the leather shoes. They all retreated, It was as if he knew fear, trying to get away from the monster in human skin. Even though she looked like a thin and young woman, her smile seemed to always be gentle. In this way, he leisurely searched for his spoils of war and put them into the small fruit basket, but the basket seemed to never be full. Gluttony devoured all the remains of the dead. In the end, she stood at the end of the long street and slowly turned her head back. Looking at the former paradise that had turned into the kingdom of death, she smiled in nostalgia. "I'm so happy being a maid." Holding the fruit basket, she lifted the sides of her old-fashioned maid's dress with both hands and bowed slightly to express her sincere thanks to the customers. No one responded. In the dead silence, only the calm and gentle smiling face on the big screen slowly retracted her gaze and turned to leave. Autumn Leaf Plains was the only victor. Luo Xian. At the entrance of the kitten paradise, the young man who was talking to Huai Shi nodded in understanding. "Is that so? What a pity. I heard that the Astronomy Association has set up a stronghold in Shinjuku. If you need any help, you should be able to find someone there." Thus, they exchanged information. They weren't angry at Huai Shi's refusal to join them. After greeting each other, they exchanged contact information and left. After all, a competition was just a competition. They were all colleagues, and they might have to visit each other often in the future. There was no need to fall out over a small matter. If they gave each other face and left a good impression on each other, they would at least have a friendship when they met in the future. Even if everyone might end up fighting each other in the end, who would be willing to start internal friction and become a joke to others? In any case, it was the astronomy club, a big family and business. Everyone was not so poor that they had no one to rely on and needed to make a name for themselves through a rookie competition. There was no need for them to do such a lowly thing. Before leaving, the young man hesitated for a moment and kindly reminded him, "If you meet the second person, you can reveal your identity a little. I believe that if the situation is not very bad, there is still room for cooperation." He was referring to the mysterious person who hadn't revealed his identity, yet the second most likely to win the championship. Huai Shi understood tacitly. So, was the person wearing a vest also one of them? Why was it that everyone was from the astronomy club, and no one could tell that someone was wearing a vest? But even if he wore a helmet, he would still be chased by a group of people until his identity was exposed. Watching the person walk away, Huai Shi turned back and looked at Yuan Zhao next to him. "What about you?" he asked. "The Social Security Bureau contacted you this morning, right?" Yuan Zhao, who had been distracted, was stunned for a moment, and then he was stunned. "How did you know? Such a big fox ran into the dormitory. You can't expect me to ignore it, right?" Huai Shi glanced at him. "That should be the army that you lead, right?" Yuan Zhao nodded subconsciously, then immediately reacted and shook his head. "I don't know what you're talking about." Huai Shi looked at him, trying to cover up, and couldn't help but laugh. "Don't worry, I'm not asking you to inquire about your teammates. I'm asking, what are you going to do next? Continue to be with me, or go find your teammates?" Yuan Zhao hesitated. He felt a little apologetic. To be fair, he hadn't helped at all in the team for so long. Although he had suffered a lot from shoveling cat litter, in the end, without Huai Shi's help, it might have been difficult for him to complete the task, let alone successfully pass the kitten paradise and get this border relic. Now that he had received a call from the Social Security Bureau, he was also in a dilemma. Although Yi Shuia's tone was not very strict, and it was just a suggestion, it seemed that he could make his own decision. But no matter how he thought about it, in this kind of place, the teammates that he had known for a long time were more reliable, right? Look at the astronomy club. Even if they belonged to different departments and regions, everyone didn't raise their weapons when they met. the relationship between the Social Security Bureau's sublimators would only be closer and more united now that the organization needed him, even if it was just a little. Yuan Zhao, as an upright and honorable brat, would definitely go and do his part. And at the same time, let everyone see how powerful young Master Yuan was now. But why sure, he owed so many favors, and he just patted his butt and left. Wasn't that inappropriate? Although why sure himself didn't care, but aside from his own conscience feeling apologetic, wouldn't he forever be suppressed by this pretty boy? He was in a dilemma. After dawdling for a long time, he hesitated, looked at the letter in his hand, and then looked at Weisher, who was calmly waiting. He gritted his teeth, stamped his feet, and made up his mind. Forget it. He took out the letter, hurriedly wrote a few sentences, and threw the letter out. In midair, the letter folded itself, turning into a small and delicate fox. After glancing at him, it ran away. Yuan Zhao let out a long sigh. Anyway, the Social Security Bureau's current progress was far ahead. The organization had so many bricks that they could use, and they didn't lack one for a while. After he returned this favor, he could slowly go over. But if she were to leave, this gigolo would probably be all alone. Just now, the way the young man from the astronomy club politely said goodbye was automatically interpreted by him as mockery and alienation. After entering the competition for so long, the people from the astronomy club hadn't come to find him. Even when one came, he still had this kind of understatement. And this pretty boy probably didn't have a good relationship with people, right? Thinking about it carefully, he was indeed quite annoying. Maybe everyone didn't care about his diet when they went out to eat. Every time he went out to sing karaoke, his colleagues would accidentally cut the song. When the spring outing was organized, he was the only one who lived far away and didn't have a bus to pick him up. Don't look at how he pretended to be indifferent on the surface. In fact, he cared so much that he didn't want him to leave. Yuan Zhao glanced at him suspiciously. When he saw Weisher's waiting gaze, his expression became sympathetic. He tiptoed and patted him on the shoulder to comfort him. Don't worry, young Master Yuan will take you to the top. It's stable. He patted his chest, indicating that Big Brother won't leave. Big Brother will take you to fly. Weisher was stunned for a long time. He didn't expect that he didn't go to find his teammates. This appearance was directly interpreted by Yuan Zhao as being touched and surprised. Suddenly, he felt more helpless in his heart. It's not that I don't want to meet up with my teammates, but this guy really makes me worry. If I don't have this white jade pillar that holds up the sky, no one will know where I am if I get beaten to death. Sigh, I can only rely on myself. Although he didn't know what happened, Weisher looked at Yuan Zhao's sense of mission and couldn't help but hesitate. Forget it, as long as he's happy. One more person won't make a difference. One less person won't make a difference. I'll just treat it as taking care of a child. And so, Weisher revealed an amiable expression like a kindergarten big brother. The two smiling faces looked at each other, and it felt like the bond between teammates was even stronger. Only when who was passing by the door, glanced at them in confusion, shook his head, and sighed. Two idiots, they took a taxi and left. Yes, they could still take a taxi in this broken place. Starting from the second day of the competition, all kinds of public facilities had been opened to the outside participants, including the transportation system, places to eat, and nighttime accommodations. Although they were all local shady establishments, they didn't guarantee quality and quantity, and they might even be life-threatening. But it was better than nothing, right? And the unified currency was the gold coins dropped by the participants after they died. As for the price, let's not even talk about the price. If there weren't any special titles or items, the price could skyrocket. Just one night's accommodation cost 10 gold coins. That was to say, if you wanted to get through the night of 100 ghosts unscathed, you had to find ways to kill 10 participants during the day. The price of all kinds of consumable items was even more like a large knife chopping at the neck of the participants. Huaishur had inquired, in the store in the Kitten Paradise, if you didn't use your prince title, you would need a gold coin to buy a shotgun bullet. Through the pressure from all sides, the competition organizing committee constantly forced the participants to start fierce elimination and duels. Cowardly? Cowardly for what? There was no future in cowardly. Could you cowardly survive 7 days? Did you want items? Did you want relics from the border? Did you want rewards and victory? Then go and be reckless. After killing all the other participants, you would be first. If you only knew how to cowardly, you would completely miss all the development opportunities in the early stages, and then become a moving gold coin in the eyes of other participants. At night, this city was a nightmare of 100 ghosts. During the day, all the places as far as the eye could see were already the hunting grounds of the participants. The third day had just arrived, and the competition had already entered a white-hot stage. A large number of participants who only knew how to cowardly in the early stages were quickly eliminated. After 3 days, everyone had almost understood the operation of the Shinua framework. Just as Huaishur guessed, do you want to become stronger? Then use gold coins. How can you become stronger if you don't use gold coins? After estimating that he now had a total of more than 50 gold coins, even Huaishur felt that he didn't have enough money. If he avoided the fight, he would only eat up the mountain. A little thought, a calm analysis, and a careful calculation. Huaishur finally made up his mind. He stood under the sign and waved to call for a taxi. Soon, a dark hearse emerged from the void and stopped in front of Huaishur. After beckoning for Yuan Zhao to follow her, Huaishur handed over Judge Jean and the additional tickets that she had extorted from Kitten before she left. Weno Park, thank you. He handed over a small gold coin and stated his destination. At that moment, he felt a chill run down his spine, and he quickly turned around. Through the window, he didn't see anything. Huaishur frowned. Chapter 244. Very quickly, the taxi began to move quickly. Like a phantom, it blended into the thin fog and sped forward. In the void behind the taxi, a few cold figures gradually appeared. He saw us. The leader frowned and asked, "Impossible." A sublimator carrying a huge backpack said, "Our invisibility device is a dark gold item. Within the range of the Happy Heart frame, it is impossible for anyone to discover us. Maybe it is just his intuition. Are you sure it is him? It is definitely him." A venomous female voice replied, "I will definitely remember that face. I already know his name and appearance. As long as he is in Yamatai, he will not be able to escape my detection range." In the team, someone hesitated. "Didn't you see the performance last night? That guy is more difficult to deal with than we expected. Is it just that you underestimated him?" The female voice sneered. "That guy has at least 4 border relics and a dark gold item. Now, he even has a Paradise Army contract. If he is not difficult to deal with, how can a solo sublimator be so strong?" The leader was silent for a moment before saying, "Miss Lin, we accepted your family's employment not to avenge you, but to help you get a ranking in the competition. If you insist on doing this, I am afraid. You can keep all the items that you have obtained." The woman, surnamed Lin, looked at him indifferently. "I don't want any of them. Moreover, I can give you one more spirit coffin blueprint." The leader hesitated. Even if the dark gold items under the Heart's Delight framework could not be brought out, the border relics and the army contract obtained here were the real deal. For border organizations like them, this was an irresistible temptation. Moreover, Every piece of equipment on Huaishur was a treasure. After a long silence, the leader looked at his subordinates and exchanged glances before finally reaching a consensus. Deal? As the taxi drove, quietly, Yuan Zhao was lying in the back seat, fast asleep, but Huaishur kept feeling uneasy. His premonition of death kept reminding him that danger was slowly approaching, but he still couldn't figure out where this danger was coming from. He could only raise his vigilance and secretly take precautions. In the silence, only strands of source substance constantly circulated between Huaishur and Nibelungen, causing the tiny darkness in the ring to constantly change, and countless internal complicated structures were constantly replaced. When Huaishur immersed his mind into it, he could only feel countless hubs that were as large as mountains colliding with each other, rising and falling amidst the rumbling, changing forms. In the end, as the mountain ghost's origin substance poured into the darkness, a familiar aura began to emerge from within. It looks like an Een spirit. His eyes widened in disbelief. It was indeed a ghost. Even though it was still in its embryonic form, the familiar aura had not changed at all. What the hell? He frowned and thought for a long time, but he didn't come up with anything. He could only ask in the Book of Destiny, "Hello, are you there?" No one responded. "Not here." Huaishur frowned, rolled down the window, and took out the key ring that Crow had given him from his pocket. "Then I'll throw this key ring away." "Wait." A voice quickly came online. "Little brother, don't be anxious. It's a token of appreciation from others. How can you throw it away just like that? Token of appreciation." Huaishur sneered and shook the key ring hard. He could hear the sound of water inside. This thing was an ink bottle. Thinking about how Crow's current body was a blob of ink, how could Huaishur not know where she was? She had probably been spying on him since the start of the competition. "I won't ask you why you sneaked in here. What exactly is this ring? It's an army contract. Don't you know?" Huaishur was speechless. "Did I call you out just for you to say this? Well, I forgot that you're a 24K newbie in this field. Let me think about how to explain this common knowledge to you." Crow coughed a few times, and a crow holding a pointer and wearing a doctor's hat jumped out of the page. She pretended to ponder for a moment, then said, "You know that whether it's the development of hell or the development of the borders, a lot of manpower is needed, right? A solo ascendant will never be able to do anything. Moreover, without the help of an organization and a huge amount of resources, not to mention Tier 5, even breaking through from Tier 3 to Tier 4 is as difficult as going to heaven." "Fine." Huaishur rolled his eyes. This woman was starting to keep him in suspense again. Even so, he still nodded. He just wanted to know what she wanted to say. "But here's the problem. The maintenance of the realm, the management of the borders, and the development of hell. Every place is a bottomless pit, but is there so much manpower in the world?" Crow waved his hand, and a number appeared on the page, including the realm, the borders, and the various hells. All the people who have ascended their souls add up to no more than 7 million people. No, 7 million people is already a lot. In fact, it's hard to say if there are even 7 million people. 7 million. It sounded like a lot, but in fact, in the huge realm, the countless borders, and the hell that was so vast that the bottom couldn't be seen, it was just a drop in the bucket. If all of them were put together, it wouldn't even reach the permanent population of Jinling. Huaishur also knew how difficult it was to ascend. Even someone like him, who had half a foot in the door, was stuck for 7 or 8 years, let alone those who couldn't even find the door. Now, other than the Silver Sea controlled by the Astronomy Society, only the spirit coffin in the world can allow people to ascend 100%. Crow said, "But whether it's the quota for the Astronomy Society or the spirit coffin, It's far more troublesome and difficult than self-ascension. There were more than 200 quotas for ascension every year. There were too many wolves and too little meat. The spirit coffin could only be used once. Between ascending a rookie and reviving the soul of a master, which one would you choose? For ordinary people, ascension was a miracle. It was an adventure that couldn't be replicated and pondered. Countless people yearned for such an opportunity, but couldn't until now. Even if there were some experiments and plans that couldn't be said in private, ascension was still uncontrollable. Just look at the Spring of Life project that the Red Gloves had experienced. Even if the chances of ascension were 10 times higher than in the realm, it was still a precious opportunity that could only be found by chance. With such a shortage of manpower, it could be said that if one succeeded in ascension, they could find a job and live a carefree life. But there was still a large shortage of manpower. For the time being, the border could still allow ordinary people to carry out their daily activities. But for the development of hell, forget about it. Without a soul to maintain consciousness, as long as one was exposed for an hour, they would definitely be mutated into something erosive in the abyss. After confirming that Weisher fully understood this premise, Crow nodded and continued. Therefore, after the Astronomy Society was established, the first generation of ascenders and the creators of the world united together. Since the discovery of the existence of the sacred mark, what followed was the formation of the Legion. And the principle and the prototype reference, you've seen it these days, haven't you? With that said, Crow looked meaningfully at the kitten paradise that was gradually disappearing between the high-rise buildings. Weisher frowned. You mean the Abyss Legion? Yes, that's right. Crow waved his hand on the page with a look of gratification. After so many days, you have some understanding of the powerful existences in hell, right? Do you feel that they are particularly similar to something? After a long silence, Weisher replied in disbelief, Sacred mark? Crow laughed. You don't think that the sacred mark is a patent of the Ascenders, do you? Don't forget the existence of the sacred mark relics. Weisher, and don't forget where the sacred mark came from in the first place. This power that was crowned with the name of the sacred mark came from the miracle incarnation of the abyss in the earliest days. Let's not talk about the relationship between the source books of the major lineages and the abyss, and the bullshit that the gods once studied. Crow said calmly, aren't the archaeological teams of the various lineages constantly exploring deeper into hell in order to fill the gaps in their lineages and unearth new paths of sublimation? The so-called power is to be sought in such taboos. In some large hell, even a large group of abyss legions is a complete path of sublimation. Crow happily threw out the settings and squinted at Weisher. With them as a reference, it shouldn't be difficult for you to understand the essence of the Legion contract, right? The so-called Legion is the transformation of a large group, your subordinates, your vassals, your brothers, the extension of the miracle, the race that holds the sacred mark. Looking at Weisher's incredulous expression, Crow whistled and threw out another bomb. If you still can't imagine it, you just need to replace the name lineage with Legion, and you will know what the so-called Legion looks like. Weisher's mind was already empty. It was only now that he realized that every complete path of sublimation hid something other than advancement. Every path was a complete Legion, from bottom to top. From the bottom to the top, countless ascenders gathered together through the path of sublimation, forming a perfect, large group of abyss legions. This is the foundation of the 7 major lineages. Why, sure, Crow said faintly, the reason why there are only 7 of the 7 major lineages in the world today is because only these 7 lineages have the technology and ability to create legions of their own lineages. Ascendants were not the only ones among them. In the 7 major lineages, behind every complete path of sublimation, there are at least 3 large groups of abyss legions. This is the unique foundation of the major lineages. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.